joining us. I guess we can go ahead and start. Renee, oh, you're already recording. Thank you. Um, Welcome. Today this is the Unpacking Change Management speaker series that the Organizational Design Improvement Lab in UNICEF has been running for the past almost 2 years now. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Mads Svensson. He's the advisor to UNDCO on business operations reform. Mads has 2 decades of experience as an advisor to the United Nations on organizational change and development. And today, he's going to talk to us about some of the challenges of UN reform, specifically the Common Back Office. So our numbers are increasing quickly. I'll hand over the floor to Mads first, just to let you know. Please, presentation will take about 30 minutes, but please post questions in the chat if you don't want to wait until the end of the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, we'll also have another 30 minutes for questions, answers, and discussion. So without further ado, Mads, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Melissa, and thank you, colleagues, for dialing in. Yes, so I'll be talking about change challenges in related to UN reform, and particularly, as Melissa said, related to the Common Back Office initiative that's ongoing at the moment. I'll tell you a little bit about what the Common Back Office is about, where it comes from politically, and reflect a little bit on the fact that, at the face of it, the Common Back Office makes a lot of sense. It seems to, be something that if you speak to people from outside the UN, they'll be, yeah, of course. I mean, of course, you'd be sharing some services and be doing things together rather than doing it separately. So the question that I pose here is, so why is it taking so long? And we're trying to unpack it a little bit today, looking at some of the very common change challenges that we are, obviously anticipating, but also zooming out a little bit to look at some of the systemic challenges that I think the UN has, just by nature of what the UN is and how it's configured and how it's governed, when it comes to making real change. And that's quite important because the adaptation of the UN is important to the continued relevance of the UN and also the trust of member states and all the countries we serve, as well as those that provide the funding. So some big issues for today's conversation. Do jump in, put your comments, your questions in the chat. I think Melissa will sort of look out for them and ping me and let me know if there's something that I should be responding to. But I'll endeavor to make the presentation first and then respond to those. But if there are particular points, I told Melissa that if people feel something is not clear, then I'm happy to, to kind of pause and go back over it. So I'll jump in and start the presentation here. But first, a little bit about the case of the Common Back Office and the change challenges of UN reform, and then we'll have the discussion. So first, the origins. This comes actually out of a General Assembly resolution, the request to set up Common Back Offices, and it dates back to at least 2018. So at that point, there was a really sort of ambitious target set to set up Common Back Offices in all countries. 131 country teams were to set up a Common Back Office. At that point, there was not a clear definition of what constitutes a Common Back Office, and also there was no methodology. There was no sort of joint approach, but that was the starting point. So 2018, request from the very top. Here you have a quote from the DSG, or actually, this is a quote referencing DSG, but it comes from the member states. And the member states obviously wanted this because they want the UN to be efficient and effective. So this also has become known as the efficiency agenda, where the common back office is just one part, and there's also a global shared services part to it, a common premises part, and there are other elements as well, all about driving more efficiency so that we have more money for programming so that we can better help our beneficiaries. There was a restatement of the commitment to this by the heads of all the large UN organizations. They came together August 2022 to recommit to an efficiency roadmap. So the first slide I showed you, that was a commitment to set up 131 common back offices by end of 2022. When 2022 came around, there were no common back offices, so there was a kind of a moment say, hey, let's not do 131, but let's focus on the 50 high volume non-crisis settings or countries and really double our efforts to make this happen. And all the principals came together and signed up for this. So again, broad official commitment, so a very visible agenda. And of course, as I said, yeah, it's about efficiency and effectiveness, but it's also, if you look at it just from the outside, if you were to plan and set up the UN today, you probably wouldn't have everybody do their own purchasing of goods and services, have everybody recruit separately, everybody doing their own logistics, everybody doing their own administration, and so on. Now, you clearly do quite a lot of it together, but that's not where we are. So we have a situation where everybody pretty much have a setup, and now we have to move from that starting point, and that obviously creates some challenges, also opportunities. So there are some clear benefits to doing things together. As I said, we can reduce the cost of operations and free up resources to put into programming, which it does. That it obviously will make things a lot. Well, it will help the efforts that we make, but we can also make things faster, more reliable, and it will strengthen the brand of the UN if we do things together. Anecdotally, just to say, and I'll come to that in a second, where we have set up common back offices by now, we have situations where we would have 30 different of 25 different UN entities come to the government to ask for help with visas, getting things through the port, etc. So 25 different entities coming to the same government that we are meant to help to ask for support to do things instead of coming just as one UN and doing things. So from a branding point of view, you can see that is not great when the UN can't do basic things together. And here, clearly, there's an opportunity with the common back office. So very strongly anchored from the very top, broad commitment from the heads of all the UN organizations and their principles, and some very clear common sense type of reasons why this needs to happen and should happen. However, we are now in 2024, so we're 5-6 years into this, and we have 3 common back offices so far. So the Kenya common back office launched 2nd of January this year, and was followed by Brazil and Vietnam, where there were expansions of existing common services setups. So we now have 3 common back offices. These 3 countries were all quite well positioned already from the start, and that's why they're over the line, and many others are not. We are continuing the work. We're working now with another 3 that we are working on getting over the line. Tanzania and Senegal will hopefully follow this year, and then we're starting up another wave of 6 countries. But the main point I want to make here is 3 CVOs. The ambition was 131 originally. Now we're at 3, and we've been at it for quite some time. We spend a lot of time, and I'll come to that in terms of the governance and the discussions and the methodologies and the instruments and all of that, putting down the tracks and the platforms to make this happen. And we are maturing, so it's not all bad. Obviously, fundamental change requires foundational work to be done, but it's interesting to reflect on the time it takes and also some of the challenges that we have faced along the way. So let's move to the challenges. Um, and here, and this is a good opportunity for me to be asked to make this presentation because it gives an opportunity to stand back and reflect a little bit on what it is that we're seeing and facing. So there's, on the one hand, and there are many ways you can frame this, but this is one way of framing it that Heifetz has come up with together with some other colleagues of his. So he's a change kind of guru, if you will, from Harvard. To talk about technical change challenges, but also adaptive change challenges. And often we think of things as technical change challenges where we need to get the right process and the right kind of tools in place, and then we just have to keep at it, and that will solve the issue that we're facing. And there are many of those related to the initiative that I'm talking about today. But there are also adaptive change challenges which really require a change in behavior, and it's more of a hearts and mind kind of challenge. And the interesting thing about this juxtaposition is that when you're facing adaptive change challenges, it's not an engineering exercise, it's really a leadership challenge. And you talk about adaptive leadership, and it requires a real sense of both space and opportunity and reframing, and also sometimes creating some tensions and letting those tensions sit and then coming back to it in order to make things shift. And that can be slow work and requires both focus and attention. And my question for the discussion is really, okay, can the UN retain its focus and attention on this type of change long enough to actually adapt? And I believe that that's the bigger challenge for the UN, is to be able to adapt and learn that exercise of improving together. I think there's a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise in the singular entities of the UN, the different UN organizations, but together, UN reform has been notoriously recalcitrant and difficult to move forward. So I put this here just as a reflection point. Here are some of the frequently sort of heard change challenges related to the common back office. Some of them relate to technical issues, and some of them really relate to a lack of trust. And building trust is so fundamental because there's a lot of history, and we see that history that is in every country and in every UN country team kind of spill over. Whether you're talking about operations or programming, people have, it's an accumulated experience together, and whatever happened in the past is remembered. So there's a lack of trust that the services will be good. So people think that if we have to rely on somebody else to be doing our procurement, it will be either slow or we will be served second after that entity has served itself. There is a notion that we will be overcharged, so they will be making money off us, and they have this kind of business there where they sell goods to us, and then they build their own program on the back of the money they make from us. There's also the sense that we have different policies, so how can we possibly work together? Our procurement rules are different from your procurement rules. So those are kind of top line challenges. Then, of course, there is, and very understandably, a concern that it will lead to job losses because you save money by having less staff, and therefore my job will possibly be at risk. And and we can come back to that. I mean, that is something that we have a lot of attention on as we support this project. There's a sense that it will be more expensive than what we are doing today. So prove it to us. We need proof that it will be cheaper and better. Um, Otherwise, why would we change? Um, and the next one is we're providing these services already globally. And that actually is true increasingly, that some of the services that were done at the country level are now being done through global shared service centers. And from an efficiency point of view, that makes sense if you can do it. But we do see asymmetry when it comes to that. We see some of the large organizations have invested in their own global shared service centers or global shared services because they're not all centers anymore. It can be distributed. But the smaller ones or the medium-sized ones have not. So we have efficiencies being generated by singular organizations for themselves, and others cannot tap into it. So very few of these global shared services are open for other UN entities to join. So there's an opportunity there, but there's also, of course, we have to reflect on the fact that the world is becoming increasingly more digital, and things can be, more. There's more vertical, service provision. Then I go to the next one. Not my board. That means basically, it's not my board is not pushing me to do this. So, and here I'm talking about the board of the UN entity. So we have an interesting challenge as a UN that the budgets don't come from one place, and the boards are not the same board for all the different parts of the UN. So that means that the leverage points in terms of change are many different ones, and it's quite difficult uh, for even the Secretary General to say this has to happen. Even though the ESG is everybody's Secretary General, it is there's not direct control over the budgets and therefore also over many of the decisions that ultimately happen when it comes to how things operate and how things work. So that is a systemic issue, and I'll come back to that. Data is incorrect, and that's back to the prove it to me issue, and that's we've seen quite a lot of that over the past few years. We're trying to make the business case for this to happen, service by service, country by country, entity by entity, and then we obviously relate this to data that we collect and get from the entities that we're dealing with. Although the data comes from those entities, we realize that it's obviously always data always have some issues, but we do run into this one quite a bit that the data is not accurate, and that we want proof. We gave you the data, but we don't believe the data, so it becomes a bit circular at some point. And then the last one here, and I could have listed many others, but just to kind of give you a picture, there's quite a lot of sunk cost in ERP systems and other digital systems, and there's integration points, and that does make organizations reluctant because what they have just invested in an upgrade of their ERP or Workday or other systems, then to move the service provision over to another team doesn't seem to make sense. We've just invested lots of money and time training everybody. And that's the thing. When everybody's trying to optimize their own reality, this is what I would call sub-optimization. Everybody optimize at the sub level, and then you can't optimize the system level because people have just invested in the sub-optimization. Um, it's difficult to overcome that. It's good that entities are investing in their own efforts. Ideally, of course, we would all have one ERP system. We would all run off the same platforms. The fact that we don't is another conversation for another day. Okay, so maybe moving on from this to some examples of what we have done to tackle some of these challenges, and then I'll close off with the more systemic challenges that I referred to earlier. So one thing that's been done at the corporate level at the outset, it was that there was an anticipation that there would be some of the things, the top line things that I mentioned at the outset. For example, the one about poor services and being treated not as a client, but as somebody who has to request and ask repeatedly for services. Um, Let me just say that again. That was a little bit unclear. If we just go back to the first one here, services will be poor, they will overcharge. And so those kind of points of resistance were anticipated at the outset. So what some clever people, and this was definitely not me, because it was also before my time, decided to do was to get the principals, so the heads of the UN organizations, to sign off on 3 principles that would enable this reform effort to happen. The first one was the client satisfaction principle, and that was to guarantee everybody that the service provision would be good. And I won't go into the details of it, but it's quite these principles are very important because the lack of trust that you would have good service provision runs deep, and by committing to these principles, anybody providing services to another entity commits to follow these principles, setting up key performance indicators, having service level agreements, having systems to track how this is happening, having feedback loops, having performance reviews, etc. So very important. Also, there was a principle on pricing and costing, which was to create some rules around how we're charging, what kind of costs are being charged for, how do we create transparency around what things really cost, uh, and then we uh, commit to having full cost recovery. And that runs both ways. But on the one hand, we don't have a profit. We also don't run a loss. So we're not dumping our services and saying, okay, we're going to do it for half price and get everybody on board. And as soon as everybody's on board, we're going to double the price. Yeah. So that would be sort of a market logic. But we are committing to transparently show what the cost is, charge the full cost, not more, not less. And then the last one is mutual recognition, and this is to deal with the one you saw about different policies. So the idea here was that we had spent quite a few decades in the UN discussing in different networks how we could harmonize our policies and procedures to come to the conclusion that we probably needed many more decades in order to get to that, and we probably wouldn't get there still. Instead, somebody sort of saw, I think, what was a very sharp insight here that maybe since if we look at it from a risk point of view, if other UN organizations have policies, those policies are out in the open. They have auditors, they have risk management frameworks. If we accept that and we're all part of the UN family, we should also acknowledge each other's policies, procedures, systems, and contracts and not question them. Because it seems odd that we would think that we as an organization do things right, but the others are not, if everybody is subject to the same types of oversight mechanisms. So the commitment here is that you recognize that other organizations have oversight mechanisms, and therefore you can accept their policies and procedures. The logic of this, if you take it to its extreme, is transformational. And lo and behold, it's also been difficult for many to really jump into the full extent of its opportunities. And actually, there is the Joint Inspection Unit. I spoke to them last week with the team. They are reviewing the progress on this principle actually being applied, but very powerful. We've also supported countries, of course, with interagency type of support and a small DCO team that's been setting up the methodologies and providing sort of support to the design and planning of the common back offices. And this is sort of there's this is just a flow showing the sort of temporal nature of it and what happens in the different phases of support. There's methodologies, there's capacity development, there's communications, and so on. All the things that you would expect from a big change project of this nature. We have a training here, and this is maybe a plug for if you haven't done your client centricity training yet. This is available to all UN staff for free. It's a very good training. I think any service providing entity, whether at the country level or the global level, should be making use of these three training modules. The first one is about the common back offices, but the other two are more generic in nature. They're obviously references back to the common back office, but do go on to the UN Staff College platform and find this course. I hope you will do so. So we also have lessons learned from the work, and I think again I won't go into this unless somebody wants to discuss this. What has it taken now that we've reset up, three CBOs established? What did we learn from that process? We just had an internal CBO review. The lessons are coming out. We are kind of building our next generation of tools and approaches based on those lessons. So that's again part of what's been done to move this forward. However, some challenges are systemic and they go beyond this project and they are really fundamental to I think what the UN is seeing when it tries to change itself. One is sort of down to the sort of core of it, the business models, the operating models of different UN entities. In general, and there may be exceptions, I question whether managers are rewarded for being efficient. Many organizations that I'm aware of, uh, they allocate a budget and the manager is meant to spend the budget. And that's the logic that sits behind a lot of the central planning and the sort of the way things operate. Money in general, budgets cannot be carried over, so spend it within your calendar year, or it's lost. So you can get into some behaviors here also where it's not really about saving 10%. On the contrary, it's about spending, your full budget and what you've been allocated for the year because it shows you're very good at planning and they're very good at executing and that is the way that you can then argue for a bigger budget next year. So there is something here. There's a kind of a tension between an efficiency agenda and the incentive structures. And as we did our internal review, we did do a broader survey, and one of the responses that came back spoke to this issue. There's a disconnect between the corporate priorities and the incentives for focal points in the field to support making savings. I mean, the disincentives are not just the one that I just mentioned, but also if you're a manager at the local level, trying to make this change may complicate your life, yeah, because suddenly instead of having your own operations team doing everything, part of the services would now come from a central team that may make your staff worried about the impact on their work situations and their jobs. It may also require that you have to adapt to a new reality and that you have to engage with stakeholders that you haven't had to engage with so far. So there's an incentive challenge here, and just at a very systemic level. There's also just the nature of the beast. This is a picture of the UN entities in in Kenya, in the middle. Yeah, you see all the different, all the different logos here. That's the country level, although there are some regional offices, there is headquarters, but all of these organizations have headquarters. Many of them, I think pretty much all of them, have regional offices as well. Now you have the reality that what happens for one of these organizations in Kenya, they will have to talk possibly with their regional office and to headquarters, not just one office at headquarters. They may have to speak both to their regional bureau, they may have to speak to their management bureau, they may have to involve their executive office. They also may have to deal with the controller if that controller sits separately from the management division. So you get the picture. It gets quite complex quite quickly. So how do you deal with that? If you have 25 plus entities with 65 different offices in Nairobi, and you're trying to get to an agreement for everybody to do something together. We managed to do it, but it required a lot of governance and quite a bit of time. I mean, of course, we're building on the maturity that was already present in Nairobi. Otherwise, this couldn't have been done within this time frame. But even then, it was not easy. So what the Joint Inspection Unit said about this back in 2018 when this all started out was that you cannot reform from the bottom up. It is the country level service is the product of an interconnected structure and cannot be dealt with at the country level in isolation from headquarters and vertical structures. And that, of course, we have very much experienced also in moving forward this project of common back offices. What the Joint Inspection Unit suggested was that the entities with the biggest footprint on the ground should come together and drive this. And it listed the 5 entities that at that point made up 3/4 of country level spending and personnel. So, and to some degree, the governance does have a concentration of these entities, but of course, all entities have to be carried with, and the governance that we have is all inclusive. But it is particularly important from a leadership point of view that these larger entities, and I think I would add the UN Secretariat as well, particularly in some countries, that they at the leadership level really show the way. I know we're getting close to the end of the presentation here. There is also an issue of accountability. This is our governance structure. So we have at the very top, we have the DSG, the Deputy Secretary General, with the principals group. Under that, there's a core group also made of principals. Below that sits what's called the big group of ASGs. Then we have the reference group of directors. Then we have task teams of various professionals, usually P4s, P5s, some D1s, occasional D2. And these are all, when it says TT, it means task team. So this is the darker blue one is the CBO task team. And then we have other task teams as well. And importantly, we report on the efficiencies of all this work as well. Now, so classically, the accountability should run straight down through these structures. However, what we felt when it comes to the actual pressure from member states and from the top is what came out in the survey is that the pressure to drive the CBO agenda flows vertically from the member states to the SG and the DSG, but then it flows to the DCO and to the RC. And just to go back to this picture, that means that it goes from the top, goes out around here, DCO, and then down to the UN country teams and the RCs. Whereas the pressure that is felt, the political pressure, isn't felt in the same way. I mean, it's felt in some way. I wouldn't say it is not felt, but it is not felt in the same way by all the entities that actually make up the core of the governance structure. They do have their own boards, and the boards are not putting the same amount of pressure. I mean, some may be, but many are not. So we have a challenge in terms of it's a very asymmetrical uh, pressure that's applied through the governance structure and the accountabilities. And that's a very fundamental systemic issue, which of course is not, I'm sure, limited to the challenge of the common back office. So in conclusion, and this is for discussion, so I see the big challenges as being adaptive change challenges, and they require adaptive leadership of both reflecting, reframing, adjusting, whilst maintaining engagement, focus, and momentum. And we've had our first wave. We are doing our lessons learned. We're still, working on some of the countries there. We are now adjusting the approach to governance and the tools, and we're starting the second wave. Now, the real challenge here is whether the UN, being this big complex system that I just described, can maintain the engagement, because there is a lot of resistance, as you probably gathered from this. Some of these challenges are technical, but some of them are very much about reluctance to adapt. So will the system be able to maintain this focus and the momentum beyond the current administration and the current Secretary General, whose term comes to an end the end of 2026? That, the ability for successive leaderships of the UN to maintain the focus the way the current administration has done will be fundamental to this particular effort succeeding. And I'll close there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mads. We already have, it's a provocative topic. I have my own questions, but I
Mhm.
will go first with the questions in the chat. Going from the more general to the more specific, so it's out of order. If you want, we could put down the slides so we can see you better in the conversation.
Sure, I'll do that.
The first question from Renee is, out of the three offices where we have CBOs now, what positive stories are coming out? What are the factors that are creating enthusiasm and energy that we can capitalize on to generate more change?
Mhm. Okay, you want me to take that one first?
Sure.
Yeah, good question, Renee. We all want some enthusiasm and energy. Yeah, so I think there's quite a lot actually. I mean, Kenya is very big in scope. So we have all the UN entities in the Gigiri complex, and that's not thanks to the CBO effort, but it does create some particular opportunities. I did mention one of those things already, when it comes to all the protocol services that's being done together at the UN level vis-a-vis the government, I think was a very positive point for the government. And now the reality is that the real energy will come from improved service provision. Are you hearing me? Because I'm frozen.
You're frozen, but we can hear you just fine.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Yeah, I mean, the real energy will come as the services improve and get better and faster, and that is not an overnight type of situation. So that I do want to caveat it with that. The other things that we've seen in places like Brazil, where they've had a joint operations facility for quite some time, is that we've seen, more clients joining in on big services like procurement, which is a very positive story. We have a team in Brazil of 14 dedicated procurement staff supporting the rest of the UN, and that will be most likely now growing since there are more entities that are joining there. In Vietnam, we have a Green One UN House that's already has a good track record and is now adding important services like procurement also to that portfolio. So you're seeing places with fairly mature common services setups now growing and building on that and telling their stories. And in this presentation that I hope can be made available, you will see the videos and the stories from those three countries, because I think it is important to talk about what is this really, and why is this positive and good. And I think that the stories, of course, telling part of that. And I think particularly the Kenya one, you'll see also some of the clients come back and tell their story. We do have other stories from, say, Vietnam, where some of the clients are talking about their experience as clients of the Common Back Office and how it's freed up their time to focus on programming and partnerships, rather than chasing on operational matters. So there are some real stories out there, and the links that are provided in this presentation will take you to some of those stories.
Okay, excellent. Then related to that, getting more specific, Dini asks, out of the three established CBOs, how many are there where UNICEF is the common service provider? So because we have a broader audience, what our interagency colleagues are here as well. What's your criteria for selecting an agency or agencies as the common service provider?
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. Good question. So just to answer the first question first, in the three, it's not UNICEF that's the service provider. Well, actually, let me take that back. In Kenya, UNICEF is providing partner implementation financial services. So they're providing one strand of the services. Yunon is the main service provider of the bulk of the services, and then WFP, on the back of its comparative advantage on logistics, is the logistics service provider. So here we have a consortium of three entities providing the services. When it comes to Brazil and Vietnam, it's UNDP. That's the backbone of this service provision. So they sit behind it, but it is a dedicated team that provides the services, and then UNDP oversees it and is, there to speak to the CBO governance board of the UN country team level. So that's just on the three. When it comes to some of the other ones in wave one, Senegal, UNICEF will be the service provider, the hosting entity, as we call it. They are now setting up the common premises, a very large common premises in Dakar with 2,000 staff, and they will be the service provider there. And in Jordan has been put on hold due to the Gaza situation, but there the preparations are ongoing for UNICEF together with UNOPS to be the service provider. Now, in terms of the second question about criteria, the first wave, it was decided politically to give what we call right of first proposal to one entity, well, two in the case of Jordan, to put forward a proposal. So what happened was that a solicitation document essentially was put forward, and one entity was asked to put forward a proposal against that document. That document outlined which services, and also a number of other questions about how this transition would be managed, how the service provision would be taking place, what kind of systems and tools would be put in place to track the service provision and quality, what KPIs, etc. So all of that has to be put into the proposal, and then an interagency panel reviewed that. They reviewed it, and then in some cases, adjustments were made based on feedback from the panel. In the next wave, it has been decided at the governance level, at the BIG, that it should be a competitive process. So that means that we would have multiple entities potentially putting forward a proposal against the solicitation document, and there are very clear criteria against which the interagency panel will then be deciding on who should be the service provider. We may end up with, cases where we have multiple service providers, and we may have some that are just one entity being the host of that service provision. So yeah, I think that probably answers both questions.
Excellent. Let's go to the next. Some interesting questions. How do you see AI playing a role in the CBO concept moving forward?
Okay, that's a good question. I think it will play a role in all service provision going forward. I mean, there is no it's not unique in any way to the common back office. I think it will be rolled out in all of the service setups where it will be, all the interfaces will be more intuitive. There will probably be easier ways to fill things in that these things are already happening. The capacity development will be, leveraging. In fact, the course that you will have the link to through this presentation, it's actually leveraging avatars already. So all the actors who are in those trainings, it's their avatars and it's their voices that then are being leveraged there. So it means that the service provision can be much cheaper, the capacity development can be much cheaper, and of course that has then again knock-on effects on what the rest of us are doing, and the types of jobs that people will be having. So no doubt it holds huge potential across all areas of our human existence. So it's I expect it will also find its way very much into the common back office reality.
Great. Thank you. And before I go to the other questions in the chat, I see Tim Chaconas turned on his camera. Tim, do you want to come in?
Yes, and thank you. Just to add, and we've been working closely with Mads and his team. In an ideal world, there should be only one technical tool that could be used across all the CBOs, irrespective of which agency is supporting the CBO. But that's not the case yet. And we've had quite elaborate discussions with UNDP, WFP, and other colleagues. And for now, just to give an example of UNICEF, we are using the OASIS-based Service Gateway tool, which we've now expanded for CBO support. It's the same technology that UNDP is using with UNORG. As these tools evolve, and they're all based on ServiceNow, things like AI and other capabilities are going to be built into them. So eventually we'll see a lot more intuitiveness in terms of how those tools are going to benefit the offices that we are supporting, and also the other agencies that may leverage those tools for their use. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. For those that don't know, Tim is one of the colleagues who's leading on UN reform work in the GSSE. So he's our internal authority. Anyone else? Please raise your hands if you want to come in. You don't have to just post questions in the chat so I don't have to read them. In the meantime, there's a question on communications. How are communications from Monica? How are communications to and from the CBO going to be managed? Email makes the process slow and dependent on a single person, and ends up becoming a bottleneck. How are we dealing with communications? Is Matt still here? I don't see him.
I think we've lost Mads.
We've lost Mads.
I wonder which common back office he's using. Sorry.
Okay. Naveen, I see your hand, but give us a moment until we can get Mads back on.
No problem.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, maybe as we wait for him to
Okay.
come back,
Thank you, Tim.
and he may have spoken about it, in his presentation. The CBO initiative is really high level because it's part of the Secretary General's UN reform agenda. And because the UN system is behind schedule, it's really, I wouldn't call it a top-down process at the moment, but there's a lot of pressure to make it happen. And these offices and countries that have been identified and are implementing now are being looked at as the front runners of what's eventually going to happen across the UN system. And the lessons that will come out of that are what will inform the variety of different flavors of CBOs that will have to be established across the UN system, across the world. So maybe that's repetition of what Mads already mentioned, but I see that he's back.
Welcome back.
Thank you,
And you're not frozen.
No, it's good.
Good, it's good. So the question was about communications and how we're going to improve communications within the CBO, recognizing that if we do everything by email, it ends up becoming a bottleneck. And Tim came in while you were coming back online, but I don't know if you want to add anything else.
I mean, I've been working with Tim, so I'm sure he answered that very, very well. I think he was speaking about the OASIS system and the whole service now that allows you exactly to do that. Yeah, that you have a trail of the requests. When did you get your service request? When did it, get closed, and so on, and the feedback. So I think it's key that we don't do this email based and that we have systems.
Yeah. And I'm going to have one connected question before I go to Naveen, who's raised his hand. It's about how do we check the satisfaction of internal clients? Are there surveys? How do we get feedback?
Yeah, and Tim could probably answer that too. But yeah, that's built into these systems. I don't know, the 5 stars, five smiley faces type of things. So you get immediate kind of loops on what's been requested, and then typically you will have a survey as well, and then you may have client conferences depending on how it's managed in different settings to understand some of the issues and talk through some of the issues. On top of that, you have the governance set up. So it's important to have those abilities to problem solve and fix issues. Clearly, we don't expect these service teams to be perfect from day one. So it will be ongoing, and the tools for feedback are absolutely key.
Excellent. Naveen, thank you for waiting patiently.
Thank you, Aliza. My question is basically, if you are looking for a successful CBO implementation, like Tim just mentioned that UNICEF has adopted OASIS recently, and UNDP is also working on. So, have we done a mapping of all the agencies, what tools they are using for case management? Because ultimately, even the OASIS is not fully, catering to the services which our users have. I am basically looking into the OASIS implementation in India. Basically, I am service desk manager and looking pan-India service desk support. So we just rolled out OASIS in India since 1st April, 1st January, I'll say. So that's my question basically.
Yeah.
How we are mapping out the services or the tools with different agencies?
Yeah, thanks, Naveen. Yes, so we've had a project started about 3 years ago, I think, on case tools and what we call the service delivery platform, We started out by mapping which tools were being used at the corporate level by the entities that we saw as potential service providers. And there was pretty much only 5 entities that put their hand up when it came to service provision. So we have that mapping. And of course, UNICEF is one of them, UNDP is one. Then there was the Secretariat, is WFP, and then UNOPS. And there's both UNICEF and UNDP are using ServiceNow. Secretariat is using a bit of a mix of things, and they've made that work for Nairobi. So their different case tools is not as clean and integrated as the ServiceNow solution. And then I think UNOPS has yet another system. I forget the name of it. And WFP, I'm not sure. I think they also have their own. But if they are being a service provider and they're about to set up in Tanzania, I think they will leverage either the system of UNICEF or UNDP, probably UNICEF. So these tools can be open in the sense that even if you have another entity being a service provider, as long as you buy the licenses and you have an agreement between the owner of the tool, then it can be leveraged. As Timothy was saying, we did have the vision to have one tool. So far, I think both UNICEF and UNDP are moving forward with what they had, which from an investment governance point of view is okay for now, but over time we would want to have kind of consistency in service definition, also in the feedback loop, so we can compare across countries how things are being managed. So Naveen, if that's of particular interest, I can possibly dig out the overview of what's being used.
Thank you. Okay, Tim, we have 3 minutes left, and there's a hot question in the chat because we have 2 colleagues commenting on it. The question is with regard to this whole CBO UN reform is a very vertical process, which is happening while country offices, it's being pushed down from above while country offices are dealing with implementation, regular implementation of the programs, plus implementation of this. In the spirit of leading by example, will there be a push for a common back HQ? And then we have a comment from Christian about not only leading by example, but the savings that you would get from a CBO at the HQ level. Please.
Yeah.
You have 2 minutes.
This is this is a kind of a conversation that we have from time to time, usually over beer and that type of thing. But absolutely, I totally agree. Of course, there should be a CBO at the HQ level. We have some remnants of it, in places like Copenhagen. The UN city in Copenhagen has quite a lot of common services, but it could be taken easily to the next level. The Rome-based agencies could do the same. The New York-based agencies could do the same. Vienna-based, and so on. So I would be surprised if it doesn't come that way eventually. But I think for now they started this way around. And I agree. I mean, obviously there's a lot of talk about doing this in the places where where there is the most cost. And yeah, you need to not say a lot more. Yeah, obviously in some of these HQ locations, there's a lot more cost sitting. What we do see now, which is almost a counter move, is that some of the HQ organizations are moving these functions out. Yeah, they're sort of moving them to Istanbul, to Nairobi. I think that's the UNICEF case. So you see various ways in which this is manifesting itself. It's not a common solution, but it is almost a counter move, yeah, because it is a way to reduce cost and overhead. So it's definitely being discussed, but I think everybody's slightly more comfortable with keeping things within their own line of command, which is and that's what we're seeing right now when it comes to HQ locations.
Excellent. We finished right on the dot. Thank you so much, Mads.
Oh, thank you all.
For spending this time with us. Colleagues, thank you for joining us. This has been one of our best attended sessions. Thank you all. We're taking a break over the summer, so there won't be any sessions over July and August. However, we're trying to solve some technical problems, and hopefully we'll be able to make all the recordings for the unpacking change management sessions available to everyone. They're already available to UNICEF staff, but we want to make them available to everyone, all of our UN counterparts. So thank you very much. Again, have a great summer. We'll see you in September.
Thank you.